All right, I think we're good to start. So welcome to Optimize Your Gut for Better Brain Function webinar. I'm hosting this session. My name is Teemu Arina from Biohacker Center. Dr. Olli Sovjärvi will be joining us in a minute, and he will be happy to answer all your questions also about digestion and gut function in the end of the webinar. Today we will be looking into digestion and nutrient absorption, stomach optimization, different conditions like IBS, SIBO and FODMAP restrictions, different restrictive diets for optimizing gut function. But one of the key topics, of course, is how you can optimize brain function. There is this old saying that all disease starts from the gut, and once you fix your gut lining, often you also see an optimal result in brain function. And that has definitely happened to me also over a decade ago when I got myself into biohacking. And one of the big things for me has been what I have done to optimize my gut function. We will also talk about gut and skin health. So basically, your skin is your largest organ, and it's a mirror often also of your gut function as well. So when you fix your gut, you're most likely also going to be able to see improvements in your skin quality and radiance as well. Another thing is different autoimmune conditions and all that. There's a lot of skin conditions that are linked to gut permeability, and Olli will definitely tap into those topics as well. We will talk about the microbiome and how to improve its diversity. From studies, it has been shown that people who have diverse number of different gut bacteria, they have, generally speaking, also usually better immunity and better health. And one of the key things, of course, for brain function, but also for nervous system and stress management is the vagus nerve, one of the most important cranial nerves that controls a lot of different functions in the body and stress response as well. And when you fix your gut, you will also see also more stable mood. We will discuss anti-nutrients and toxins that are not good for the gut. And of course, the anti-inflammatory opposite of that, the kind of foods that are beneficial for the gut. Then finally, we will dive into all the different testing that you can do for measuring and understanding your gut function, and food intolerances and many other topics. So without further ado, feel free to type in the chat that you see it also works, where you're from, and you can comment during the presentation, and you can also leave questions. If you have any questions, I will collect some of the top ones, and Olli is happy to answer those during his presentation as well. So yeah, let's bring Olli on the stage.
Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? This is a very exclusive webinar on optimizing your gut function. And I will present you maybe 20 plus slides on the topics that Teemu mentioned here in the introduction. And perhaps we can have, if there are like very important questions during the webinar, but especially after that, I have a lot of materials. And if you are like putting in 1 hour, it's gonna be a nice little show. So without further ado, let's get into the topics. I will share my screen and hop on. So welcome to the Optimize Your Gut for Better Brain Function. Of course, better brain function, that's is a result of optimizing the gut. I'm going to be speaking about the gut-brain microbiome axis, which is very crucial. And just a short history on my experience in treating gut issues in my doctor's appointment. Around 10 years, I now take remote consultations and work online. And I think I've done close to 1,000 gut tests, and we're going to be speaking about the tests also at the end of the webinar. And of course, I've been healing my own gut issues throughout the years. I've been suffering from IBS and SIBO and stress-related issues, so also my personal experience will help with that. But yeah, let's talk about the issues that this Western lifestyle, the human conditions, and why there's a loss of this microbial diversity. Most people are in a hurry and stress, and we live in an urban environment. We take all kinds of drugs and antibiotics especially, they've been shown to really disrupt the gut microbiota, even up to 30% for up to 1 to 2 years after one course of antibiotics. If we get born into this world with cesarean section, that's also disrupting from the birth when the gut microbiota should be forming naturally. So that this could be an issue, but nowadays they usually have been treating this pretty well in the birth parties or in the hospitals. And of course, processed foods. All of these things together lead to this LOMD, loss of microbial diversity, which is a significant thing. The more diverse our gut, the better usually the gut health and also the overall health. And these disruptions have been linked to different kinds of immune diseases like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, type 1 diabetes, celiac allergies, and even MS disease. And of course, metabolic disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and even cancer and autism. Many people have functional gastrointestinal disorders, and there's many things that definitely will have an effect on this, like early life, your genetics, environment, birth, and then we have like the psychological status, life stress, social things, and physiologically, of course, how your gut is functioning. What's the motility? Is it very like this the sensation? Like if it gets stretched, many people can actually have some symptoms around that. And of course, inflammation, altered bacterial flora, having these dysbiotic bacteria that can be for sure treated. And these together, like the brain central nervous system communicates with the gut nervous system, and they really speak together, and they lead eventually to functional gastrointestinal disorders, and they have an effect on our behavior, on our emotions, like psychological state of mind. And these often lead to visits in doctors, which lead to medications, and it's kind of like a snowball effect, and the medications may actually make it worse, or they could actually help. But this is the functional gastrointestinal disorder model. So it's a complex thing. So it's not just fixed easily with, hey, take this pill or this diet, but it requires a systematic approach. Let's talk about what actually happens when we eat. So I think it's crucial to understand the basic physiology, even anatomy of the gastrointestinal system. This image is actually from Biohacker's Handbook, from the nutrition chapter. So when we eat food, the digestion begins immediately when we're eating. So the saliva contains amylase and maybe even some other enzymes. And from there on, it goes to the stomach, which needs to be very acidic. Otherwise, it's not going to do its job. And hypochlorhydria, which means like too high pH levels in the stomach, can lead to many kind of problems in the gastrointestinal system. And from there on, the actual absorption goes into the small intestine, and duodenum is part of that third part, which is like the crucial part regarding absorption. And we need, of course, enzymes from the pancreas and bile salts produced by liver, stored in the gallbladder, and they are secreted into the small intestinal. And from there on, we eventually go to the large intestine. And many people actually do not realize that the appendix that often gets inflamed or infected, and it's often getting removed surgically, but it's actually the storage place for good bacteria. So if that is moved, it will definitely have an effect in the whole gut microbiota and the microbial diversity. So that is also that should be asked from a person if he has any gut problems or she. In the large intestine, it's mostly the formation of the stools and like reabsorption of water, electrolytes, and so on. And there's these like really nice movements that are regulated by the autonomic nervous system, and when it functions properly, it's nice flow. And usually like the defecation, going to the bathroom about 1 to 3 times per day, that's normal. But if it's like overly sympathetic activated, you could get diarrhea and go to the bathroom like too many times. And if it's like on the other side, you could actually get some constipation. And there are these like reflexes. So when you eat, there's this gastrocolic reflex from the stomach to the large intestine to actually move the stools forward. So you might get the urge to go to the bathroom when you're eating. So that's a normal thing. And here are the parts that play an important role in the digestive system. There's of course the stomach, which is very acidic, small intestines, large intestine, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. So I think this is like what every person should know in a conceptual level, that hey, we have this ingenious system, but there are so many things that could go wrong, and also so many things that we can definitely have an effect to. So let's take a look at poop. This is the classic Bristol stool chart. This is also, of course, it's not our invention. This is research based and widely used in like gastrointestinal disorders and when in evaluating the composition of poop. So type 4, type 5 are ideal, and if you go towards type 3, type 2, even type 1, it's often a sign of some kind of a problem, like getting into the more the diarrhea state. I mean, like the constipation, yeah. So constipation, if you're constipated, lacking fiber, not enough water, you will eventually get towards type 2 and type 1. And on the other side, more towards diarrhea, type 6, type 7 go into the liquid, and that's usually related to stress and or even like high blood pressure. But yeah, you know, taking a look at your stools, it's definitely one way to say something about the gut microbiota and the diet. So here's nutrient absorption. This is kind of like a stretched image of the intestines. So as you can see, there's some absorption in the stomach, but most of the vitamins, minerals, and other micro and macronutrients are absorbed in the small intestines, most of them in the duodenum, some of them in the jejunum, and some vitamins in the ileum. And in the large intestine, mostly water, but vitamin K is an exception, and then some electrolytes and short-chain fatty acids. In the introduction, Teemu mentioned about the orchestrator or the regulator of the whole autonomic nervous system, which is the vagus nerve. And as you can see from the image on the right, it's really connected from the brain stem, the medulla oblongata, even until the large intestine and the colon. And it's innervating even heart and like lungs, spleen, kidneys, most of the internal organs. And the vagus nerve's role and the functions in the digestive system, it increases HCl production in the stomach, which is very crucial. It needs to be acidic. Peristaltic bowel movements, which means that the stuff goes further to be absorbed and then defecated. And also it increases the intrinsic factor production, which is happening in the stomach, and it's needed for the absorption of vitamin B12. And of course, eating. When we are in a parasympathetic mode, it's very easy or a lot easier to digest the food, let's say, compared to being in a hurry, stress, eating very fast. Usually that's disrupting the digestion process. So it's a good idea to spend some time eating. I would say this 20-20 or even 30-30 rule, which means like spend at least 20 or 30 minutes and chew at least 20 to 30 times per like piece of food you put into your mouth. If you have some dysfunction in the vagus nerve, it can cause problems with the digestion, like you could develop dyspepsia, reflux, colitis. It even affects like glycemic control, urinary excretion, and even immune function. So this is a very important orchestrator nerve. So when I meet like people or do consultations, I always ask or let them reflect on their stress levels, and if like all the diet and supplements and so on seem to be on place, but still they have problems which are not shown in any tests, it's usually vagus nerve and stress related. So let's take a look at how to optimize stomach function, which is like the first. Of course, there's esophagus when the food goes down here, but the stomach is very crucial for all the food to be put kind of like a pre-digested. So if it's not if the stomach content it's not acidic, there's going to be a lot of problems. So how can we increase or make the stomach function better? So first, we would want to find out the HCl production balance, and there's a test called gastropanel, at least in the Nordic countries, but I think also in Europe it measures pepsinogen 1 and 2 and other markers that will show non-invasively what the actual production of the HCl is. Zinc carnosine, it improves parietal cells and HCl production. That would be like the first thing I would recommend to somebody who has probably like low stomach acid levels or problems with the HCl production. You could even take betaine, HCl, and pepsin if you have clearly lowered HCl production and you don't have any like, let's say, wounds or heavy inflammation in the stomach. If you do, then this might cause some problems, and you first have to heal the cell wall lining of the stomach, which we jump into the part or section 3. So L-glutamine really helps also recover the cell walls, also in the intestine, but also in the stomach. Then we have silicone and silicone acid caramelose gel. So this creates this stomach cell lining protection. So if you have like dyspepsia or even reflux, this is a really good help. Apple cider vinegar usually helps with HCl production, and this is kind of advice that do not drink when eating. If you drink a lot, it might dilute the HCl, maybe not that much, but it, digestion could be working better if you're not drinking a lot while you're eating. And as a reminder, chew carefully and take time for eating. If we have any relevant questions now, I could take, let's say, 1 or 2. Or if Teemu is not speaking, then
yeah, we got a few questions here. So Andrea is asking, how can you measure the acidity of your stomach? Is there a test for that?
Yeah, it's called gastropanel test. So that measures, as I mentioned previously, like the pepsinogen 1 and 2 and gastric, I think it was gastrin 17 and also Helicobacter antibodies.
Is there a test for that at home, or do you have to go to a...
It's a lab test in a laboratory, so I haven't seen any home test yet for that.
Right. Dr. David is asking, do you have a protocol for mild Crohn's disease?
Well, basically, it follows the autoimmune protocol that I actually go through in the Optimize Your Gut course. So there's this scheme for treating that. I've treated many people with Crohn's disease, like co-treated with the help of their medication. Usually they end up actually reducing or even leaving their medications off. So the autoimmune protocol would be a really nice idea. And of course, the gut healing protocol that I also go very deep in the course. Regarding the time frame of this webinar, it will take the whole webinar go through, but definitely I will mention about the course as well. So the course is also very good for professionals. It's actually also designed for professionals.
Yeah, it's extremely comprehensive, but basically it gives a lot of new information for professionals, but also for anyone really about who is ready to optimize their gut function to the max. So that's interesting. And Michal asked also if the gastropanel can be done at home. No, but there's some gut tests that can be done at home, and Olli will touch those later in the presentation. Yeah. Dirk is asking, can you take glutamine daily for longer periods? I've heard you couldn't take it longer than 2 months.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it like all the time. Probably, let's say, a very good advice to many approaches in supplementations is either 5 days on, 2 days off, or 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Of course, that depends on the situation, but you definitely would want to have some breaks.
Yeah, I think there is this kind of acute way of fixing your gut, which is like 5 to 10 grams of glutamine, like if you get like food poisoning or something afterwards to help the villi.
Yeah, or even tens of grams, like kind of like this like mega dose, kind of similar to vitamin D mega dose, so it has a different effect. But also, like, glutamine could cause some side effects if you take it with too big amounts. So having breaks is a good idea. But yeah, let's move on with
maybe
slides.
one more, so we got it covered, because we are talking about amino acids.
Sure.
Does a lack of animal protein or certain amino acids, vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients besides zinc also cause hypochlorhydria?
Theoretically could cause, because you need especially essential amino acids to make different kind of functions, like hormones, neurotransmitters that play a crucial role in the regulation of the digestive system. So let's say if you're vegan, even close to 100% of vegans are somewhat deficient in essential amino acids. So I would consider supplementation with essential amino acids.
Wonderful. So let's continue with the presentation. And if you have any other questions, feel free to ask in the chat, and we're happy to answer. And I did post also the link to Olli's gut course if you want to take a look at it.
Okay, so about low stomach acid levels, which is also called hypochlorhydria, it will cause bacterial overgrowth, especially in the small intestines. So here's the conceptual model. So if it's very low for a long time, the bacteria that should not enter to the small intestine will actually get there, and they can easily overgrow there. So usually in the small intestine, there shouldn't be that much bacteria. And this will also lead to carbohydrate malabsorption. And as symptom-wise, it will lead to increased intra-abdominal pressure. So you usually get very bloated quite often. And the consequence eventually is heartburn and GERD, which is a gastroesophageal reflux disease. So it's very important to treat this possible low stomach acid. This is something, if you go to regular doctors, they actually do it like the other way around. They prescribe you proton pump inhibitors, which make things worse. In some cases, of course, they can be beneficial if it's the other way around. There's too much acid, but oftentimes it's not, it's the other way around. It's masking, of course, the symptoms, but eventually it may lead even to worse outcomes. So how to optimize large intestine function? First, I would test for the microbial diversity, the system and the balance. We go through that at the end of the webinar, which kind of tests I would recommend. And the vagus nerve function, as I mentioned previously, very crucial also in this one. Certain probiotics, prebiotics might be beneficial, probiotics food, but this is also highly individual. Some people, they do not tolerate any of these, let's say like some fermented foods. If they have like histamine intolerance, then usually these are a no-go. So it's highly individual. Generally, prebiotics and fiber and resistant starch are a good thing for the microbial diversity and the large intestinal function. But if you have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, then this might actually worsen the symptoms. The fourth point is, of course, always important to understand avoiding unnecessary antibiotics. Antibiotics are necessary in certain situations for sure, but if it's not absolutely essential, then always good idea to consider avoiding it. And on the more softer side, we of course have mind and emotional balance and control. Like you create a lot of stuff that also could be happening in the gut, inside your mind, and from the gut-brain axis. So even the composition of our thoughts can actually have an effect on the microbiota in the gut. And yeah, drinking enough liquids. So cheers, everybody. If you have a glass of water, let's have a sip. And even better if you have some electrolytes, as I do, even better for the absorption of the liquids. So anti-nutrients, these are, as the name says, certain chemical compounds in different foods that may cause some problems. Of course, for everybody, they may not be that problematic, but let's say if you have an autoimmune disease, I would totally avoid most of the anti-nutrients. In the gut course, I go through all of these, but here are like 4 most important groups when it comes to the gut health. And the first one are prolabins, especially gliadin, which is part of the wheat, gluten. And then there are other prolamins in different grains. They are called orane, secalin, and other grain prolamins. So this is important to notice that every grain has a prolamine structure. So if you go gluten-free, that might not be enough if you are very sensitive to these prolamines, and they may cause some problems. So going to total grain-free is usually a better solution. So these can damage the gut lining. Then we have lectins, which are very high in grains and legumes in particular, and these can cause intestinal damage and even like leptin resistance. The third group are glycoalkaloids. These are very high in nightshades, which are eggplant, tomatoes, potatoes, and especially if they are raw, but anybody should not eat any raw potatoes ever, because you will get poisoned. But there are some glycoalkaloids even in like cooked potatoes, especially in the peels. But good thing regarding these is that the most parts are destroyed when they are being cooked. So that's a good thing. And we have saponins, which are pretty high in legumes, oat, quinoa, sunflower seeds, and they also actually have this hormetic beneficial effects. So here the poison is in the dose. A little of these, it's actually good, but if you eat a lot, it might be problematic. And of course, you can like process these, like soaking and even sprouting will definitely reduce saponin contents. And yeah, let's take a look at the prolamine content of different grains. So it is in every grain, and it's like the gluten part. The gluten includes or it consists of prolamine and gluteline, and every grain has their own prolamine. Like why wheat is so problematic is that it has a very high total protein content of gliadin. So let's take an example of the rice, which has orzanin. It's only 5%. So that's usually why white rice fits most of the people. Of course, not everybody, but it's usually like the most well tolerated grain. And oats also pretty good, pretty like good. Corn, barley, rye, they're kind of in the middle. So just want you to guys know that going gluten-free might not be enough because there are like these other prolamines in different grains, like similar to gluten. So the question is that if you react to gluten or grains, of course, you should have like differential diagnostics if you have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance, or if you have wheat or grain allergy, or if you're just not tolerating FODMAPs. We're going to be talking about FODMAPs in a while. So the differential diagnosis is very like important. And on the left side, there's this picture. I think this was from Fasano, which first presented this autoimmune trio of causes for celiac disease. So there's the trigger, which is gluten protein. We have a genetic predisposition, certain HLA genes, in this case, like DQ2 and DQ8 proteins. And third very important thing is the leaky small intestine, so the leaky gut. So all of these things need to be on place for the celiac disease to actually activate. So what are FODMAPs? Perhaps many have heard of FODMAPs, so you have probably tried of these, like reducing these. These are fermentable oligodemonosaccharides and polyols. What they have in common is that they cause bloating in quite many people actually, because they increase like the volume of the gut and like they absorb water, or the water is kind of like stuck into these different oligo and demonosaccharides and polyols. It is highly individual which of one of these may cause some problems if you have IBS, like irritable bowel syndrome. So the FODMAP reduction is one of the first line of treatments there. For example, for me, I have IBS, and I've kind of like identified my kryptonites, and they seem to be avocado, apples. Yesterday I tried to eat some asparagus. Not really that well tolerated for me. And garlic, one of the worst ones. Artichoke, beetroot, unfortunately. I do eat these every now and then I get some symptoms, but they usually go away in a day. And what else? Yeah, broccoli. If I eat a lot, it could definitely causes some problems. Mushrooms are no-go. So mostly what I react to are polyols and some fructans. I never eat any legumes, so probably I would suffer from these. But what is effective treatment, like symptom-wise for IBS, is to reduce the total amount of FODMAPs to less than 10 grams per day. And here is what is the research-based FODMAP diet in the management of irritable bowel syndrome. So it's consisting of 3 phases. There's first the restriction phase, where you usually restrict most, or if not all, the FODMAPs from your diet. And then after, let's say, 4 to 8 weeks, you go into the reintroduction phase. One by one, you reintroduce like this. Let's say I reintroduce avocado. If I get symptoms, I reduce the amount, or just give up that food for now, and then find your what actually fits you, and then you have the personalization period. And this is of course like a good idea to do with the consultation or with the dietarian or some kind of other professional or doctor. But this actually really works very well. Now let's jump into the gut-brain axis. So the gut and the brain are definitely connected via the nervous system, but also with different kind of chemicals and different components, signaling molecules, nerval endings, and so on. And in the biohackers brain nutrition guide, I've actually gone through this pretty exhaustively. So if you want to optimize the brain function to the maximum, definitely check out the biohackers brain nutrition guide. So how are these actually connected? So here on the left, we have the systems biological model for brain-gut microbiome interactions. So in the brain, we have this brain connectome, which definitely like has stress reactivity, mood, sleep, and other things. And the central nervous system side communicates straight with the gut microbiota. And we have micro-derived neuroactive molecules. So there's a constant signaling between the microbiota and the central nervous system at the brain. Then there is autonomic nervous system that modulates all this. So the modulation reflects on the motility of the gut, how different kind of signaling molecules are secreted, if there's a permeability in the gut, which is not a good thing, and of course the microbiome or the microbiota. And the gut microbiota has an effect on the intestinal cell wall lining. And then we have the gut connectome, which regulates immune system, neural system, and neuroendocrine system. So there's this pretty comprehensive communication model between the brain, the gut, and the microbiota. So it's not just gut-brain axis, but actually what happens in the gut, what happens in the gut microbiota, and what happens in the brain. And on the right is a pretty nitty-gritty image from the brain gut microbiome axis, a research paper from 2018. So how these effects are in relation to the serotonin secretion. So we have the autonomic nervous system modulation in the intestinal cell wall lining, and it has certain signals that have an effect on the 5-HT, which is serotonin, but also short chain fatty acids and bile acids. And these have an effect on different kind of spore forming bacteria and tryptophan formation. So what is it? This is to say that what you put inside your mouth, dietary wise, has an effect on the gut cell wall and the serotonin production, but also what comes from the autonomic nervous system to the enterochromaffin cells has an effect on the gut. So what if we have the so-called leaky gut, which means that the intestinal barrier we see in the left, normally like the epithelial cells, they are very tightly together. There are these junctions between the cells, tight junctions, so which forms like this very strong layer, but it could get damaged. Like if the normal barrier, there's mucus, like none of these possible threats have an effect through the cell walls, which actually could lead to like immune reactions through the bloodstream and then causing some problems in the immune system and even like certain organs. Let's say like the MS disease, celiac disease, even like autoimmune thyroiditis could be caused by problems in the gut. So if the barrier is very leaky, there are definitely problems, and through the cells or like in between the cells, certain molecules can go to the bloodstream and cause problems. So the question is, if we have a leaky gut, do we also have leaky brain? Because the blood-brain barrier, which is a similar structure that isolates the brain and the circulation, like keeping those bad stuff out. But if we have leaky gut and we have so-called leaky brain, that could also lead to all kinds of problems regarding our brains, our like thinking, even psychological disorders and so on. So taking care of the gut usually also helps to take care of the blood-brain barrier. What would be like the best ways to actually improve the gut health? So I've highlighted here polyphenols, and based on the research I've done and like all the papers I've read, polyphenols seem to be really, really important for everybody. And they really do not have like these side effects that like certain probiotics may have, even prebiotics may have. So focusing on getting a wide like variety of different kind of polyphenols in different kind of plants, very colorful plants, berries, vegetables. The key is the color. Usually the more polyphenols there are, let's say like bilberries, very dark, anthocyanins, and so on. So in the gut course, I go through all the possible polyphenols that one could consider eating, but good like rule is that eat very colorful and a wide variety, a spectrum of different kind of plants and berries to maximize the polyphenol content. Of course, like you have polyphenols in the coffee, so very high quality coffee is actually helpful, especially if you tolerate some caffeine. But what the polyphenols do, they increase beneficial bacteria, they increase the production of short-chain fatty acids that feed the cell wall, but also do many other metabolic functions. They are anti-inflammatory. They actually may destroy pathogenic bacteria, and they improve the firmicutes to bacteroides ratio, which is a beneficial thing, for example, for weight management and preventing any metabolic diseases. So the key takeaway from here is to have a nice mixture of different kind of polyphenols. So for example, Teemu Arina uses these berry powder mixes in his coffee. So he gets a ton of polyphenols like the first thing in the morning. And I also like use a lot of polyphenols, a lot of berries. I like them more fresh, but also like frozen, different kind of frozen berries. I've been mentioning about stress. So the HPA axis definitely has a dramatic effect on the epithelial cells and the cell wall lining. So the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary axis, adrenal axis, which is the basic stress axis, which eventually leads to a secretion of cortisol, but also like aldosterone, and on the short-term stress to adrenaline and some noradrenaline. But mainly this is like if you're chronically stressed, you have like high corticosteroid, high catecholamine production. That is leading to an increase in certain prostaglandins, like lipopolysaccharides, cytokines, which then again have an effect on not just on the gut, but also on the brain. But on the gut side, they may cause this leaky gut, the disruption of the barrier function. So that's also why taking care of the stress management and the HPA axis regulation and control is very, very crucial in optimizing your gut function. And I also promised to speak a little about the relationship between gut and the skin, also could be called gut-skin axis or gut microbiota skin axis. And if you have a healthy gut microbiota, your intestinal cell wall is like intact. There are no disruptions in there. And you have like a normal production of short-chain fatty acids, normal microflora. Usually you have a healthy, normal skin. As an example, acne is a good example of this kind of disruption. Of course, it's not always about just leaky gut, but also like the regulation of different hormones, insulin, IGF-1 in particular. So high sugar diets will definitely disrupt this homeostasis. But also, like, I had acne when I think it was from 15 to 25. And I really suffered from that. I was drinking a ton of milk. Yeah, definitely sugar, although not that much, and also like high amounts of grains. And when I realized that, hey, the diet has a significant effect on the skin health, my skin actually dramatically changed when I changed the diet to this kind of like a Paleolithic type of diet at that time. That's almost 15 plus years ago. So yeah, you definitely have some skin issues if you have the leaky gut problem and you have like dysbiosis, and there's a like disruption in the production of these short-chain fatty acids. And well, the image says pretty much that eventually it leads to disruption of the skin microbiota. And usually one of the major things is elevated production of Propionibacterium acnes, but also triglycerides and fatty acids, and it's causing a lot of inflammation. In the gut course, there's a specific section about this thing, how to actually improve it, what other things are having an effect on the skin health. But this is just to know that if there's a leaky gut problem, there's an increased intestinal permeability, there's usually also problems in the gut. And one other thing is that if you do food intolerance tests, and you have like a lot of different foods that you seem to be reacting to immunologically, then that is also very often a sign of increased intestinal permeability. Of course, you can test that, and this is very simple test provided by Nordic Laboratories and Genova Diagnostics. This is what I did for patients. You drink this liquid that has lactulose and mannitol, and then it's measured from the urine how much of that actually goes through. So this is a sign if there is a increased intestinal permeability either through the cells or between the cells. So very simple test to do. And now let's jump into the tests. We have some few minutes left this webinar. This is my Ferrari or Lamborghini or choose whatever car you prefer, the GI 360 X3. This is the most comprehensive gut test there is. So it has about 20 pages of analysis, a complete analysis of the microbiota and the whole like structure, whether it's just dysbiotic, what actually needs to be changed, but also like complete stool chemistry, digestion, absorption, inflammation, immunology, and like short-chain fatty acids, and very important other markers, and of course like microbiological kind of like this analysis, but also PCR analysis. But there's this, if there are growing pathogenic bacteria, of course, that's not a very good thing. Usually you have some symptoms, but these imbalanced bacteria actually cause also all kinds of problems. So I've been dealing with these like back in the days, like different bacteria that were related to certain kind of clinical outcomes in the health, like proteobacteria or citrobacter species and so on. And I've been treating them with certain herbal medications. And of course, many people have certain yeasts like Candida. It's very common. And of course, this measures also different kind of parasites, nematoids, worms, flukes, and you name it, everything possible and impossible. These small creatures which may cause a lot of problems. So the GI 360 definitely the one you would want to take. And this is also our most sold test. And I have analyzed these close to maybe 1,000 it's exaggeration, but like a couple of hundred tests. Like I have done a lot of these analyses also on myself, not like hundreds. And then if you want to test for SIBO, which is for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So as you can remember from the earlier parts, if you have problems in the stomach acid production, that may lead to the growth of small intestinal bacterial like overgrowth. And you can measure it from the breath by drinking the solution. And then they measure like H2 and methane gases. And it's also treatable like without antibiotics with these natural treatments. And all the protocols I go through in the Optimize Your Gut course. And the most important test for any food intolerances is this 184 food items containing IgA and IgG test. And that's really informative. So I have an example, like a friend's wife had this nagging kind of atopic skin lesion that just didn't go away. And we did its test, and she had a lot of these intolerances. And then she changed the diet based on this test. And in 3 days, the skin lesion almost got away. So that's how fast your system reacts when there are like this inflammation causing foods, when you take this off for a while, and your system, and in this case, the skin, was able to heal. These are found in our web store, Parker Center store. And of course, last but not least, if you really want to learn more, definitely I would recommend, if you really want to like optimize not only your gut function, but maybe your clients or relatives or friends' gut function, the Optimize Your Gut course now for a limited time, minus 50%. And now I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Indeed, we do. So if you have any questions, please ask the questions on the chat and we're happy to answer. Now, there was a question about cellulite and if it's linked to carbohydrate malabsorption.
Cellulite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. Just by, I don't know if my wife really likes this, but she sometimes complains about, I got this a little bit of this cellulite, and then I kind of watch what she eats, and she also noticed that if she eats like too much bread and like these crackers and so on, the cellulite increases. So it definitely has to be some kind of relation to that.
Yeah, there is basically like the body has some difficulty of absorbing and digesting certain type of carbohydrates, such as lactose and fructose. But it's not like, based on the evidence, it's not fully known what all the mechanisms are. It's most likely a combination of several different factors, including hormonal changes and circulation and lifestyle factors and diet and all that. Exercise, of course, what people do to get rid of it.
Sure.
Yeah. So next question isn't raw chocolate one of the greatest polyphenol sources that also increase longevity in mice?
Oh yeah, I totally forgot that. I don't know how I did that. let's fix that, because I just absolutely love chocolate. I'm gonna do like a live demonstration with you guys now. I have the Finnish food
I
in
hope you are able
raw.
to still speak after having.
Yeah, 90% raw, like this unprocessed. It's better than dark chocolate. So yeah, one of the mother of polyphenols. I don't know how I forgot this. I was talking just about berries, but yeah, definitely raw cacao, raw chocolate, dark chocolate.
Not the one with a lot of sugar in it. So basically, it has
No,
cardiovascular benefits, improves blood
which is
flow,
90% raw.
shown to reduce heart disease risk. So there's a lot of circulatory benefits to these polyphenols. Dark pigments in general, like dark berries, dark chocolate. We also like chaga mushroom, which is very high in antioxidants in general. Dark pigments often have these similar effects. And regarding longevity, there are specific compounds in chocolates that's like similar to the effects of resveratrol, epicatechins have shown to increase lifespan in mice. So, yeah, like one of my favorite also is bilberries or blueberries with anthocyanins. Also has shown to improve cognitive function, by the way. So blueberry is actually a nootropic in a sense. And
True that.
let's see other questions. So Peter, what food cause most problems, and what are good to avoid, and what to include? Like if you summarize.
Yeah, if you recall from the anti-nutrients, yeah, it was a pretty quick one, but based on my experience and the literature, the food groups that cause most problems are different grains, legumes, and like this, yeah, grains, legumes. I would say these two. Like
Right.
if you have any problems, these may actually reduce about 80% of the problems. But then again, if you're FODMAP intolerant, then it's a completely like different game.
Yeah, I would also add processed foods, trans fats.
Well, yeah, that's kind of like a no-brainer. But yeah, of course,
It's good to
ultra-processed
mention.
foods. Sure.
Like all these like sugary beverages that actually, like if you think about the healthy alternatives that people market for putting into your coffee, like oat milk, actually
it's very bad.
It's gonna spike your blood sugar even more than soft drinks. So
and of course, processed oils like these seed oils, it's definitely have an effect on the gut, but also like the total inflammation of the system. So highly processed seed oils like sunflower seed oils and corn oil, and these are very harmful for the body.
There's a question about
olive oil, on the other hand. That's not the seed oil, but it's kind of like a vegetable oil. That is completely the opposite. So extra virgin high quality olive oil actually has very, very, very beneficial effects on the gut due to the polyphenols, but of course also the fatty acid structure.
Indeed.
But high polyphenol content.
Dirk is asking about personalized probiotic supplements based on microbiome tests. We do actually have one product like that in the store. It's called the Elsevier gut microbiome test. It's also like compared to GI 360, it's a cheaper way to get in. But one of their services is that when they look through your report, they recommend you what fiber is good for you. So, like many prebiotic fibers, like there's many good ones, of course, but you can actually figure out what is optimal for your gut. Of course, the science of microbiome research is still evolving, so it's kind of we're gonna like learn more and more as we go forward with these things. But definitely, I would consider that like a last mile thing of optimizing. Like if you're kind of like done already a lot of like good things with elimination and like cutting out all the useless stuff and all that, and then figuring out what specific prebiotics, for example, would work for you, or probiotics. What would you say about this?
Definitely possible. I think we are still a bit far away from that because it is so complex. The microbiota and the gut is so complex, and we don't know yet what would be like the optimal probiotic for each person. And of course, the composition of the gut and the diversity and the microbial flora actually changes even like in one day. At least this is based on mice studies when you change the diet. So that's why it's also, you also have to take into account your diet. What I found to be most successful probiotic for many of my clients is something called seed. So it's a symbiotic, has different strands that have been very highly scientifically validated and researched. And this is also very good in this sense that it does not cause any histamine producing strains or bacteria. And even for me, it's actually seems to be beneficial. So the histamine intolerance thing here is very crucial. That is a topic I didn't talk that much about, but in the course, there's a whole section on the histamine intolerance that needs to be taken into account because it's a very, very major thing.
Yeah, so Andre asked why oat milk is bad. So there's a type of sugar in it that spikes your blood sugar much faster than regular sugar. And when you eat oats are great because oats have beta glucans that are amazing for the immune system, like producing more macrophages that are the kind of things that eat away all the pathogens. But the problem with juicing oat into a liquid form is that then the carbohydrates absorb so fast that if you take a blood sugar monitor, you will see like it just goes off the roof. So it increases risk of diabetes, obviously. And it's the same for fruit juices, like orange juice is marketed as a healthy morning thing for vitamin C, but it's so much different to have an actual orange where you have the fibers and you're digesting it slowly compared to like drinking it. So that maybe is it. What sources of polyphenol would you recommend for people with histamine intolerance? Like chocolate has histamine, for example.
It's yeah, I tolerate chocolate. Like if I eat the whole thing, that's probably too much. But yeah, for berries for sure, and coffee, like a high quality coffee, also a very good one. And there are certain like, let's say, cappers and these dark colored specific vegetables, like very dark leafy green vegetables. They have certain like polyphenols in there.
I think Emma-Leena is asking how to treat and cure SIBO. I think we kind of touched that, but maybe you want to like just like reframe it again.
Simply put, yeah, of course, the whole protocol is in the course, but simply put, FODMAP restriction, very low sugar diet, that works, and then you need something that destroys the harmful bacteria in the small intestine. My favorite is a product called Atrantil. We don't have that in our store, at least not yet. That is very effective. And then, of course, treating possible vagal nerve dysfunction regarding like the stomach acid production, and then fixing stomach acid, possible hypochlorhydria with betaine HCl. Of course, there's a caveat to that. If your stomach cell lining is very damaged, you cannot do that, or you have some other problems there. But this is like in a nutshell that will definitely treat that.
Yeah, there is a question about stomach acid. So if the tissue has already been damaged and you're on proton pump inhibitors, like what should you do? Like how would you like tackle a situation like that?
Well, I
with the
would
stomach acid going up.
I would try the zinc carnosine first, and the Carmelos or the silicone gel, usually very well tolerated. There's this specific product. It's called the Rescue, REZCUE, that has been shown to be very effective to actually many gut disorders, but also in this case. But of course, if you have some medications or a condition, I cannot really say what actually functions for you. You definitely need some consultation on that.
I see. All right. Peter is asking, is all food causing oxidation and inflammation in the body?
No, definitely not. There's actually this dietary inflammatory index that's been validated in a couple of studies. I go through this in more in the nutrition webinar side and nutrition book or the guide, but certain foods definitely like lower inflammation. And then there are these foods that we have been talking about that elevate the inflammation. So it's kind of this delicate balance. And that's why there is this thing called anti-inflammatory diet, which is highly concentrated on these anti-inflammatory foods. Let's say cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil is a good example. Polyphenol content, like containing food, turmeric, ginger, and so on.
So, Mikael is asking about food intolerance test. I did put that on the chat. You can check out the test right there. Any idea how to treat acid reflux? I guess like that's one of the most common ones. Like, yeah, I guess you just have to like drink a lot of alcohol and eat a lot of sugary foods, right?
And chocolate. Yeah, the reason, finding out the reason for many, it's actually SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Then you have the reflux and it's not working, like the flow is not working as it should. But of course, that's not like the only reason. You need to be like medically evaluated if you have like some physiological anatomical things there, like something in the diaphragm could cause some problems or something else. But very often it's actually SIBO. And in cases of GERD and IBS, there seems to be almost like 50% of the people who actually have SIBO as a like a in the background causing these things.
There is also a question about the 360 test. Is it possible to know if there is a deficiency of digestive enzymes like
Yes.
lipase and
Yes.
amylase? And
yes.
Is this test better than GI map?
It's very similar. Both are good. Both are like very good. But this is what I've used to do. I also analyze, like if people do GI map, it's also like it's a bit different, but also very comprehensive.
And is it possible to know if there is hypochlorhydria based on this test?
There could be some hints of that, but it's not a strict test. So that's why the gastropanel test, like you can take it from SynLab, for example. So
Dirk is asking, I've had chronic fatigue for almost 20 years now. I've tried a lot of different things. I have extremely healthy lifestyle, been on many doctors. What things are essential for me to look in terms of tests, etc. next? Like
GI 360 for sure. Yeah, I would start with that. But also the Metabolomics Plus test. That is really, really, really good test if you have chronic fatigue. And it's also telling a lot about the condition of your mitochondria and the citric acid cycle, neurotransmitters, and different vitamins, minerals.
Peter is asking about tests for omega-3 to omega-6 balance. We actually do have a test coming out, like probably this week still, maybe next week. It's called BioStark's nutrition test, and it will have omega-3 to omega-6 index. It will measure vitamins, minerals, amino acids. It's an excellent test for anyone to do at home also. And why would you can you remind us, why would you be concerned about omega-6 to omega-3 balance?
Just about the testing, the Metabolomics Plus has an add-on test for fatty acids from the blood, and it definitely has this index. So generally, the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s should be about 1 to 2. So one ratio of omega-3s and 2 omega-6s, even 1-to-1. But the Western lifestyle and the diet has kind of thrown this out of whack, so to speak. So I've seen patients having like even up to 1-to-20, which is ridiculous, and like too high omega-6 acid count, especially linoleic acid, is causing a lot of inflammation and oxidation in the body. So that's why it's very crucial. And omega-3s, especially the long chain omega-3s, are highly anti-inflammatory. Of course, you wouldn't want to have these too much either, but usually the problem is the other way around. People don't have them enough from the diet.
Right. And there finally, I think there is one question about. Okay, well, what about gamma linoleic acid? Just to add into it.
Yeah, it's a very important, like essential amino acid, fatty acid, also tested like in these like fatty acid profile tests, let's say, and on in the metabolomics plus test. So yeah, this is something I've covered in detail in the nutrition guide, also in the nutrition course. But it's GLA, like the abbreviation. That is actually something people also lack. So when you measure, I've measured hundreds of these tests on like these fatty acid profiles. So for many, it's people lack, and then you usually supplement because it's a bit hard to have from food. So GLA supplementation, like fatty acid wise, it's could be beneficial for many. But of course, if you do not know the levels, it's always guessing. So that's why I've measured my levels and I know if I need it or not.
Right. And yeah, the final question, are there supplements you can recommend to increase neutrophils?
Yes, I cannot recall it like now. I would have to check from my Optimize Your Lab Results course. There are stuff that you can do regarding like the blood count levels. There are, but I don't recall it like at the moment, unfortunately. But you can check the Optimize Your Lab Results course if you are worried about like your blood biomarkers and what to do about them.
Right. And maybe finally, let's take Dirk's question also. Favorite books about health, nutrition, performance. Of course, the Biker's Handbook is amazing, which is available at bikercenter.com if you want to dive into optimizing nutrition, mind, work, sleep, exercise.
I read it. Dirk, good one.
Awesome, man. So yeah, like, is there any other favorites, Olli, that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, a massive book which is really comprehensive would be Ben Greenfield's Boundless. I think that's really well put together. Like there's very like really nitty-gritty like protocols for almost like everything. But if you want to know like more about, one of my favorites book is I just have to check it, but it was something Chris Kresser recommended almost 10 years ago. Like it's called like a disease of like kind of like it covers the lack of our exposure to different kind of soil and microbiota throughout our early parts of our lives. The disease of absence. I think that's the title, the disease of absence. So that's really amazing book. It really like opened up my understanding how we are connected to the surroundings we are actually living in, and then from there on I've been like playing around like my hands in dirt and like doing gardening and stuff like that, just to exposure my whole body and system more to the natural microbiota.
Chris Kresser also has a lot of good information about this on his newsletters and some ebooks and articles on his website.
Yes, for sure.
And for sure, like Siim Land has several interesting books, like the metabolic autophagy, for example. Anyone interested
Stronger
in
by stress, yeah,
and Stronger by Stress, and there's a couple of other books as well. Yeah, like we spend most of our time reading like the study articles, so we haven't had actually that much time to like read actual books for a while, because we are just like reading thousands of articles all the time.
even though there's like a whole library, but I think these are very old, kind of similar with what I have at home. I used to order a ton of books like all the times, but now like when you read thousands of articles like in a year and write and produce, the amount of books I've been reading has definitely like diminished a lot. But if you just like want to maximize that, you could like use these services that kind of like do these resumes or these kind of wrap-ups, like Blinkist. It's a good example of that. So you can actually read a book in 17 minutes just by listening to the highlights.
A couple of other recommendations that I can throw in, like more on the biohacking side, is Sean Wells, The Energy Formula.
Good one. I actually read that a year ago.
Yeah, and if you're interested in life extension, David Sinclair's Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to is pretty good as well.
But you know, with a grain of salt, because it's I've seen a lot of critique on that, and I've read the critique, and it's made me think that maybe it's not that.
Yeah, like there's a little bit of hype, of course, like around Sinclair, and he's somehow a bit biased on many things. But similarly, like what's the like sleep book? Super popular sleep book. What's the name?
Yeah,
why we sleep,
I know,
or something like this.
Yeah, Why We Sleep.
Yeah, Why We Sleep.
Matthew Walker.
Yeah, that's a good example of a book that is like full of errors. Like a friend of ours like just found like 200 errors and just like stopped. So if someone is a doctor or researcher, doesn't always mean it's a great book. So that's why we like to read the actual articles. So many of these books
definitely, and not like even the abstract, but actually go to the source. And that's the way to go. And even then, be a little bit of like with skeptics, like maybe there are like some other sources that could actually support this. And
indeed. But I mean, like we had a pretty educated audience here, so thank you very much for all of you joining in. If you are interested in learning things like what Peter is asking, is food causing oxidation in the body per default, all these things, the course is amazing. So biohack.to/gut, you can find more information on Olli's gut course, and that goes really deep into many different topics. And the nice thing is that Olli is also on the forums there. Plus, there is a lot of conversation already, and it's a great resource for anyone interested to really take this to the next level. So biohack.to/gut, check it out. Thank you very much, everyone. We will be sending the recording as well. So if you missed something, if some of the terminology was too much for you, like you'll be able to dive into it again. And I will also send all the slides. So and we will be having these kind of webinars in the future more on different topics. If you have any of your favorite topics and so on, let us know. Most likely we will be touching a lot about nutrition, but also things like sleep and exercise and stress management. There's many topics coming in a very condensed way. So thank you very much for everyone for joining for the webinar.